I would like to welcome Laura Whelan from Trinity College Dublin to the stage.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. There we go. Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. I hope you can see my slides and everything. Let me know if you can't, obviously. So thank you for the introduction. I'm really delighted to be here speaking at Pint of Science Ireland. Of course, I wish I was in an actual pub and this wasn't my Zoom background, but I've got my gin and tonic. I've got my jeans and a nice top, so I'm ready to go. I've got the vibe going. And today I'm going to talk to you about what's the story with your DNA. But before I get right into that, I want to give a little bit of extra background about myself. I'm a third year PhD student in the Smurfit Institute of Genetics in Trinity College Dublin. I realise now that it looks like I've said I'm a scary PhD student. That is not what I mean. I actually mean quite the opposite of that. I mean that it's scary that I'm already in my third year. It feels like I just started and the pandemic has warped all sense of time. But I'm the opposite of a scary PhD student. I'm really interested in doing a PhD feel less mysterious or closed off. I feel like as an undergrad student myself, I didn't really know what a PhD was or that it was an option for me, at least until my final year. And so I talk about these things on various social media platforms like Instagram and Twitter. So shameless plug, feel free to follow me there as well. But I'm also really interested in fashion and makeup outside of my work. So I was absolutely delighted last week to get my hair cut and my nails done and my eyebrows done for this talk. I'm like a whole new woman. So delighted with that. So my research, I study the genetic causes of certain types of blindness. Specifically, I research inherited retinal disease. So the retina is a layer of cells at the back of your eye that contain the photoreceptors, rods and cones that allow you to see. These diseases are what we call Mendelian, as in that they're caused most primarily by small changes, 1 or 2 changes in someone's DNA. I work as part of a project called Target 5000, which is the Irish National Registry for Inherited Retinal Diseases, and my PhD research is funded by a charity, Fighting Blindness Ireland. But before I get into the science, I want to share some personal news with you all, and I promise it's relevant. I recently became an auntie, and I swear I'm not just sharing this to get kudos for sweet baby pictures, but this is baby Nasa. She's the new addition to our family. That's her and my sister there at my sister's master's graduation just last week. She's absolutely beautiful. I can't get over her. But I promise this is relevant. So NASA has actually made me think about part of my talk, and what it is a personal anecdote. So when NASA was born, I have a lot of friends who are scientists or clinicians in training, and I told them, that the baby was born, and pretty normally their first question, was, "Is the baby okay? Is your sister okay?" And yes, so everybody's fine. That's great. And the quite normal response to that is, "That's great. That's the main thing, that everybody is healthy and happy." But I've gotten funny responses from my scientist and clinician friends, because they've all said, big giant sigh of relief, thank God, because when you study all of the things and all of the simple little things that can go wrong, it's actually a miracle that we're all okay. So this is our new little miracle, and I just wanted to share that. So it brings me on to talk about those small changes and what DNA is. So you can think of DNA as the blueprint to your body, the instructions for making you, you. The DNA code is made up of 4 letters, A, T, G, and C. None of that nonsense of a 26-letter alphabet. To make a human, you just need 4 letters, A, T, G, and C. Here in the middle is just kind of an example of what's known as a Sanger sequencing trace that we have in the lab, and it just visualizes the fact that your DNA is made up of letters. And here on the bottom, I also just want to point out what is the central dogma of biology, which is DNA becomes RNA, which becomes protein. Of course, it's much more complicated than that, but just bear that in mind for the rest of the talk. DNA becomes RNA, which becomes protein. Before I go on, I just wanted to give a shout out to kind of DNA in popular culture or media. So, if you're not a scientist, maybe you're more familiar with DNA and genetics in this way. So movies like Jurassic Park, Avatar, comics like X-Men. Of course, the DNA of the moment is the DNA in the vaccines that are going to allow us to go back to normal life, like the AstraZeneca vaccine. You might have heard of genetics in the context of celebrities or media, like Angelina Jolie, who came out with her diagnosis of having a BRCA mutation or a BRCA variant that increases her risk of hereditary cancer. and it really raised awareness for that area. And then I would also be really interested to know if anybody in the chat has done any of these or taken part in any of these services like Ancestry.com or 23andMe. Of course, they look at your DNA to try and figure out where your ancestors came from. And actually 23andMe does have some form of kind of health screen as well, where they look at your DNA. So I guess the point I want to make is that DNA tells a story, right? So grab something near you with some writing on it. It could be a book. It could be, I have a can of Coke here that has writing on it. But just for those of you who might not have anything around you, I've also included a screenshot from, shout out to Marion Keyes, a book of hers that I'm reading right now, for you to look at. So I guess I just want to point out, if you look, fairly obviously, letters make up words, okay? And words make up sentences. Sentences make up the story or the message, and the spaces play an important role as well. You wouldn't want to read a book if it had no spaces in it. So look at the structure of all that, and you can actually see that your DNA has the same kind of structure as well. So in the same context, like I said, your DNA is made up of 4 letters, and those letters make up exons. Exons are coding parts of DNA. So remember before I said DNA becomes RNA, which becomes protein. So exons code directly for protein, and introns don't code directly for protein, but are still important. So exons make up parts of genes, and genes code for proteins. So I think you can see what I'm getting at here, that letters in your DNA are like letters in a sentence or a word. The exons are like words. Introns are like spaces, genes are like sentences, and then the proteins that are a result of all that is the whole story at the end. The thing is that one little difference can change the whole story. And you might be saying, oh, you've got so many different letters, such a wide collection of letters in your DNA. How could one little difference really make that much of a difference? Well, have you ever sent a really embarrassing typo? Okay, so just take a look at these. I mean, who wants to drink the sweat tea? This saying dead before bed. Are you sure you want to exist, as opposed to are you sure you want to exit? And my favorite, it's warming up, it's not ass cold anymore. So these are just examples of how you can swap out letters or add in letters, and it changes the meaning of the sentence or the message that you're getting from these things. And it's the exact same in your DNA. So back again, just bringing it back to my research, like I said, I studied the genetic causes of certain types of blindness, and small changes in over 270 genes have been associated with inherited retinal diseases. So we have a lot to look at. And then you're probably asking, well, what do I actually do? Well, I'll put it this way, very simply, I'm a glorified DNA spell checker. Okay, I look at the representative sequence of someone without inherited blindness. We call this the reference genome. The genome is the collection of all the genes in your body. And we compare that DNA to the DNA of our patients who have inherited blindness. And we essentially play a game of spot the difference. We try and find differences between the healthy and the individuals, and the individual who has inherited blindness. Oh, I'm mixing up my words. We find the differences between the representative genome and the individual who has inherited blindness. But it's important to remember that not all typos are bad. A lot of my job is not only finding the differences, but interpreting those differences and trying to find evidence that suggests that they actually cause disease. So we want to make sure that they have a big change on the protein, or that they're in genes that actually function in the eye, because that's where the problem is. And then just drawing that back again. So if you've done something like Ancestry DNA, the changes that they look at are often neutral. They're just enriched in particular populations so that they can decide where your ancestry comes from. So they don't change the function of the protein or change the story. So the way you can get typos where you can still understand what someone's saying, doesn't really change it that much. Again, it's the same with DNA. If I'm to talk a little bit more specifically about what I do exactly, is I research changes in the spaces. So spaces in a book, say, while they don't contribute to the content of the story, are still really important. It would be hard to read it without them. I did lie a little bit earlier. So unlike books, the spaces in your DNA do still have letters in them. The introns are still consist of letters, but changes in these introns can have an effect. We know now that some changes in the introns or the spaces